All right, I'm in the Gospel of John. Gospel of John. I'm going to be moving into the Gospel of John, chapter 20, in this message. To begin with, I'm going to just review the end of chapter 19. What happened was that Jesus was crucified, and Nicodemus and Joseph, they took the body of Jesus and they embalmed the body, and then they placed Jesus in a tomb. All right, so I'm going to start there. At the end of John chapter 19, beginning in verse 41, it says, "Now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid. So there they laid Jesus because of the Jews' preparation day, for the tomb was nearby." All right, it being nearby was convenient because it does require a lot of effort in order to move a dead body. But you've got the preparation day that is described here. And so I'm going to review the idea of the preparation day. This is important because you see a time gap between Jesus being laid in the tomb and in chapter 20 when Mary discovers that Jesus is not in the tomb. All right, and so the preparation days were a very important part of the timing of what was taking place when Jesus was crucified and when he rose from the dead. The first preparation day was on Wednesday. There were three preparation days in a row. That's the issue of the preparation days, is that there were three of them. The first day of preparation was the preparation for the Passover meal, and this took place on Wednesday evening at twilight. The Passover would begin, and that was the Passover day, and that was when the Passover meal was held. That was when Jesus had the Last Supper with his disciples. It was a Passover. So there was the preparation day for the Passover, and then after that, on Thursday, there was another preparation day, but this day was a preparation day for the Feast of Unleavened Bread that was going to begin on Thursday at twilight. This would be Thursday evening. That would be the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So that was a preparation day. And then on Friday, there was another preparation day. All right. So the third preparation day has not yet happened. That's in between chapter 19 and chapter 20. But the third preparation day, which was Friday, was the preparation for the seventh-day Sabbath. All right? It was the preparation for the weekly Sabbath. Thursday was also a preparation for a Sabbath. The first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread was a Sabbath day as well. So you had three preparation days, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, all in a row, and you also had two Sabbaths consecutively, one after the other. The difference between the first Sabbath, which was the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, was that you were permitted to prepare food. And that was where the Passover Seder came from. That was the big meal that a lot of people are suggesting Jesus participated in with his disciples, but that was a day late and a law short. That was not the same meal. But there were two Sabbaths that were held consecutively, one from Thursday evening until Friday evening. That was the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread on this year, this year that Jesus was crucified. And then right after that, you have the beginning of the seventh-day Sabbath, which is from Friday evening until Saturday evening. All right. Now, what's unique about the Sabbath, as it is important to this transition from chapter 19 to chapter 20, is that no one would leave the city limits of Jerusalem. All right. That's what was really important to understand about these two consecutive Sabbaths, is that no one would leave beyond what was known as a Sabbath day journey. So everyone who arrived in Jerusalem to participate in the Passover, They would have arrived and participated in the Passover on Wednesday evening. On Thursday during the day, they only have that day to travel before the next Sabbath begins, which is going to happen that evening, but they also have to prepare for the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So there was a lot going on, and not very many people would get too far when it came to this set of Sabbaths and festivals that were happening during this year when Jesus was crucified. All right, so what this means is that the whole nation is required to be in Jerusalem in order to observe the Passover. Not everybody's going to go, but they were kind of required by law. There was no real enforcement, from what I understand, that would result in great consequences if a person didn't show up. But at this time in history, the majority, a good majority of the people would be expected to be there in Jerusalem or in the surrounding communities that were temporarily annexed as part of Jerusalem. And these people would be there all the way until Sunday, relatively speaking. Like I said, you could go a Sabbath day's journey, but that still wouldn't be too far. So you're going to have people staying in the area waiting for Sunday morning when the seventh day Sabbath is over, and that is when they would then begin their week and go back to their regular lives. So Jesus was in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. He was in there for 3 nights, Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night. He was there in the grave for 3 days, Thursday during the day, Friday, and Saturday during the day. Those were his 3 days and 3 nights that he was in the grave. And because of all these preparation days and Sabbaths and festivals that are going on, everyone is going to stay within the remote area, within within close proximity of the area. They're not going to go very far. And so when Jesus resurrects from the dead, news is going to travel quickly to the majority of the people in the land that a resurrection has taken place. Obviously, the big news of him being crucified would travel around and everybody would know that he was dead and he was put in the tomb. That would be news, that would get around. So also the resurrection would be some profound news that would get around. All right, so that's kind of the summary of what's happening here. Let me go ahead and move forward into John chapter 20, Gospel of John chapter 20. In verse 1 it says, "Now the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. Then she ran and came to Simon Peter and to the other disciple, whom Jesus loved, and said to them, 'They have taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him.'" All right, now who this they is, who they are, we don't really know for sure. But according to the other accounts that we have, we know that the Romans secured the tomb. They established a seal on the stone to make sure that nobody would move the stone. They made sure that Jesus' body was in there. The Roman soldiers did this. They secured the tomb in the sense that they drove a spike into the stone and into the wall, and then they would tie it in a way that it would be difficult to undo. And then there was a guard. There were several men who were posted as guards there in order to make sure that no one would disturb the tomb. The Romans did this. So when Mary showed up and discovered that the stone was taken away, this was not an insignificant thing to discover. This was a big deal. All right, and obviously there was no one there. Otherwise, she could have asked somebody what happened. But there was no one there. No one was there. The Roman guards were not there. Okay, they were not there, and Jesus was not there. Apparently, no one was there. Okay, now this is a big deal because if it was discovered that the stone was moved and Jesus was taken out of there, against the decree of the Romans, somebody's going to die. All right? That was the law at that time. Somebody was going to die. And so this was a very serious matter. And Mary made the assumption that it was probably the Romans who took the body of Jesus away, especially considering that they were not present there. They were probably over wherever they were, with the body of Jesus at some other location. Mary did not know where Jesus was. She ran to Peter and the other disciple, who most likely is the writer, the way that this is written, referring to himself, to John, says, "They have taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." So the assumption that was made was that somebody took the body of Jesus. Mary, Peter, John, they did not make the assumption, oh, well, there you go, Jesus resurrected from the dead. Does not appear that that's the case. It appears that they made the assumption that somebody took the body of Jesus. All right, moving on into verse 3. Peter therefore went out, and the other disciple, and were going to the tomb. So they both ran together, and the other disciple outran Peter, and came to the tomb first. That's verse 4, which suggests that this is John, and he's just wanting to add that little notation, and by the way, I ran faster than Peter. That kind of a notation appears to be made here in verse 4. Okay, verse 5, and he, stooping down and looking in, saw the linen clothes lying there, yet he did not go in, probably wanting to emphasize the point that he's not going to become ritually unclean. All right, verse 6, then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb, and he saw the linen clothes lying there. And, verse 7, and the handkerchief that had been around his head, not lying with the linen clothes, but folded together in a place by itself. And I'll come back to verse 7 in a few minutes. Then the other disciple, who came to the tomb first, went in also. All right, so he decided, okay, I'll become ritually unclean. Obviously, there's no dead body here, so hey, no risk of that taking place. Went in also, and he saw and believed. For as yet, he believed what? What did he believe? He believed that Jesus was not there. Okay, that's what he believed. So Mary went to the tomb, discovered that nobody was there, not even Jesus, went back and told Peter and John that nobody was there, not even Jesus. Peter and John ran over there to the tomb and want to get there really fast. This was a big deal because, like I said, the Romans were given instructions to establish a guard. The guard was established. The tomb was secured. It was sealed. And so this is a big deal that nobody is there. How could that possibly be when the Romans established a guard like they did and secured the tomb in the way that they did? How could it be that nobody was there? Well, they got there and they looked around, to include inside the tomb, and then they believed. But they believed what? They believed that Jesus was not there. Okay? That's what they believed at this point. So continuing in verse 8, then the other disciple who came to the tomb first went in also, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not know the scripture that he must rise again from the dead. Then the disciples went away again to their homes, right? They did not know the scripture that he must rise again from the dead. They didn't understand the purpose for which the Messiah came. They also did not understand the prophecies related to him being an eternal being as well. So there's a lot to say about the scriptures. It would be a study to explore. But they didn't realize, they didn't really believe that Jesus would resurrect from the dead. What they did believe was that he wasn't there. Okay, that's what they were able to believe at that time. And this is what John, I believe John is the person who saw this, that he's referring to, the writer himself. And he's declaring, he's stating that at this point they did not understand or believe in the resurrection, but they did believe that the body of Jesus was not there. So John has emphasized previously that Jesus was dead. Okay, he emphasized that. He wanted to emphasize the point that he really was dead. And now he's going to emphasize the fact that he's not in the tomb. Somebody put him in there, the Romans secured everything, and he's not there. So he was dead, that's for sure. Now he's not in the tomb, that's for sure. Okay, and then what do? Well, they just go home. What else are they going to do, right? I mean, really, what are they going to do? The Romans probably, or somebody, took Jesus. If they wanted Jesus to be located, if they wanted him to be found, then they could have just left him there. So for them to take him somewhere automatically gives the impression that wherever he is, if he has been taken, this has been done for the purpose of secrecy. All right? And so why bother going to go look? Because they probably, whoever they are, they probably have already gone through, put out a lot of effort in order to ensure that nobody would find out where Jesus is. And so, what for? What's the big deal? And, in addition to that, what would they do if they found the body of Jesus? I mean, there could be some tremendous risk associated with being found with the body of Jesus, especially because of the Roman guard and the securing of the tomb and the law that was established, the declaration that no one is to move the body of Jesus. If they get caught with him, well, they're going to be put to death. So better just not to know where Jesus might be. And so they just played it safe, it appears. They just went ahead and went home because, of course, what else are they going to do? Are they going to go and question the Romans? They're not going to go do that. What is that going to look like? They're going to go up to the Roman compound and they're going to say, hey, listen, folks, there was supposed to be a guard established at the tomb, wasn't there? Yeah, there was. And where are those guards now? And how about securing that tomb now? It's unsecured. So what's happened here? They're not going to go and provoke any investigation or any conflict. If they do that, then somebody could get in trouble. And if somebody gets in trouble, well, there might be some interest in executing some revenge against these guys who stirred up some trouble by asking some questions that other people would probably prefer not be asked, and just let this pass away and be forgotten, hopefully. All right, so this is what could easily have been going through their minds when they discovered that, sure enough, the tomb is empty. We believe it. And then what do? Well, let's just go home, Let's just go. And that's apparently what they did. Verse 10, then the disciples went away again to their own homes. Okay, now in verse 11, we have the conversation that happens between Mary and the angels and then Jesus. But before I get there, I'm going to go back up to verse 7. I mentioned this earlier about the handkerchief, or what is often in other translations referred to as the napkin. All right, in verse 7, it says, and the handkerchief that had been around his head, not lying with the linen clothes, but folded together in a place by itself. All right, now I have to mention this because in recent times, within the last 10 or 15 years or so, maybe 20, as the time when this is recorded, there was this belief that was propagated that some people were suggesting that this had some kind of a Jewish, Pharisaical, religious significance of some kind. All right, and this is a belief. This is an opinion, a teaching that has come out of what is referred to as the Messianic movement or the Messianic community of churches. And these congregations of people They're congregations of people that have assembled together to observe some of the Jewish customs and practices, and they have established what's referred to as messianic synagogues, assemblies, and they in general, they are saying that they have established these congregations in order to attract Jews to the congregation, because their practices and their services are similar to what what people are accustomed to in Jewish synagogues. All right, and so the belief is that if you can attract them in to something that's familiar to them, then then you get them in there, and then you can tell them about Jesus being the Messiah, and maybe they'll get saved. And I suspect that this probably has happened on occasion. I would expect it to be the case. I have heard some rumors that this has happened, but for the most part, that's not what's really going on. For the most part, you've got non-Jewish people who are trying to be like Jews because they believe that if they're more Jewish, then they will be closer to God, because Jesus was Jewish and he was obviously close to God. There's also this belief that many of them have that if they will observe the laws of Moses, or if they will observe the laws better than other people do, then they will have a higher probability of being blessed by God. All right. And of course, there's some enjoyment in participating in the rituals and the ceremonies and stuff that they establish. All right. And I've visited many different Messianic congregations and spoken to a lot of people within these congregations. One Messianic rabbi even spoke with me about some of the things that were troubling him. He was one of the founders of the Messianic movement, and he was concerned about things that were taking place. He was open with me because I had a significant background in Judaism, and so he felt more comfortable talking with me than with everybody else in his congregation. But he was concerned about a lot of people coming to his congregation, and he would marry people, and then they would be a part of the group for a period of time, and then after a while they would convert to Judaism. And he was concerned about that. He didn't think that, and of course he should be concerned about that. It's not what you would expect. You would think, that you would hope, you were hoping to do the exact opposite. You're wanting people to convert from Judaism to Christianity, not from Christianity to Judaism. So, what are you doing? What is this about? This always depends on the congregation and the group and the people. I'm just giving you an example of something that I personally have encountered. And there are many different opportunities in different congregations and different people all over the place. But this is one of the reasons why they were established, was in order to try to attract Jews to hear a message about Jesus. And unfortunately, that really hasn't been the case. Something else that I would like to mention that I've noticed from these congregations is that for those of us, myself and others who did grow up in a synagogue or have spent a lot of time in synagogues, we don't really get impressed by the Messianic congregations at all. If a person doesn't know any better, then they can be impressed by that. But for those of us who do have quite a religious background and have spent time in many different synagogues, especially Orthodox synagogues, what we see is a very reformed version of a reformed synagogue, which is about as Jewish light as you can get. I mean, it's just to the point where it just doesn't have any meaning at all. And the behavior and the attempts at people trying to be someone that they really are not, in many ways is kind of offensive, and the poor pronunciation of Hebrew, all kinds of issues. I've had a lot of conversations with other Jews like myself who have visited many of these congregations, and for the most part, we're glad that we got the cultural exposure of this new culture. Okay, it's definitely not our culture; it's a different culture entirely. We got that cultural exposure, but we just don't don't belong there. We just don't. We don't have any interest in being a part of that. So this is what's kind of happened. But another thing that these congregations are trying to do is they're trying to assert the idea that you can only know the scriptures and you can only really know your God if you understand Jewish traditions, and Jewish beliefs. If you understand those things really well and you understand the law and you understand the festivals, well, then you can really know the Bible and you can know your God, kind of thing. And, there are a lot of things that I would say do have meaning. Many things do have meaning when it comes to that. In this presentation that I've done through the Gospel of John, I've pointed out a number of these things. And you'll find many others that I've recorded for radio, for Living God Ministries in the radio archive there. You'll find that I've recorded a lot of historical content that would qualify as being things that you should know about Pharisaical Judaism and about the Judaic history and the culture that would make a difference when studying through the scriptures and understanding the ministry that Jesus was conducting. Unfortunately, the things that I've presented are in general not presented in these Messianic congregations, and what they do present doesn't usually is not usually correct, all right? Especially when it comes to things like the Passover, for example, as I mentioned earlier, that they're looking at the Feast of Unleavened Bread as if it's the Passover, not realizing they're a day late and a law short. So there are some errors that are there, and also they're not really embracing those things that could really contribute to what it is they're doing. And I've been invited to many of their events, of the Messianic community. I have been invited to many events, not as a speaker, but as an opportunity to go and visit and learn something, and yet they don't know anything about what it is that I am doing and what I have presented. It's a whole different subculture entirely, and what they advertise, they just don't really deliver from my point of view. Okay, now this particular item here from John chapter 20 verse 7 with regards to the napkin or the cloth, this particular item is something that has just recently showed up, and it is completely wrong. It's a complete made up fantasy of what people would like to say, has some kind of significance or meaning, but it just does not. All right, it is a completely made up belief that is being promoted in order to assert some sense of wisdom or some sense of greatness, that we have some insight that of course nobody else has. But it just isn't real. All right, and I'm mentioning it in this message because I'm recording these messages, obviously not just for now, but for many years to come, hopefully many generations to come. And by then, it may be assumed that this belief that has just recently been invented, if you wait long enough, then people might assume, well, I guess it's always been that way. Similar to a lot of the beliefs of the Pentecostal and the charismatic churches, for example, with regards to the speaking in tongues. People don't realize that it's a very new, modern belief in terms of how they define what speaking in tongues is, and because it's gone on for about 150 years or so, people have just kind of made the assumption that it's always been that way, not realizing that no, it's a very new thing. And so this napkin stuff that people are promoting, 150 years from now, they might also be thinking that it's always been that way. It's always been part of history for forever. No, it's a new invention that people have come up with. All right. What it is that people have been promoting the idea that because it was folded, there is some special cultural significance to it being folded. Because it was folded, it was a way of saying that he's going to come back. That he's not done. That's what people have made up. All right? I don't know who started this. but it's been going around, and every once in a while it resurfaces, and I get flooded with a bunch of questions about it. But this is the belief that because it was folded, it was Jesus's subtle way of saying that he was coming back, because supposedly at Jewish tables, if the napkin was folded, it would mean that you're not done eating. You just stepped aside, away from the table for a short period of time. You're coming back, and you're going to continue to finish your meal. All right? Now, this is completely made up. All right? There is no historical basis for this of any kind whatsoever. There is nothing in the historical writings that would come close to suggesting that this would be the case. All right? And to emphasize the point, I will mention that there is a discussion about napkins. There is in the Talmud, in the rabbinical writings. There is. I found one. Nothing like what people are trying to promote with regards to it being folded or not. But there is a discussion, and so I'll tell you about that just to emphasize the point that at least, there was some thought put into the subject of the napkin back in the time of the Lord Jesus, and there was nothing suggested about whether it was folded or not back then. All right, but what did they talk about? I'll mention that, okay? And if you'd like to research this for yourself, you can. I'll give you the reference because it's important. If somebody wants to say that it being folded had significance, they should provide a reference. I'll give you a reference for this one. It's found in the text Berakot, folio 52b. All right, that's Berakot, folio 52b. And there's a discussion about the napkin. All right, and the discussion was, where should you place your napkin? All right, where should you, when you're having your meal, how should you handle your napkin? And there were two schools of thought that was discussed here. There was the school of Shammai and the school of Hillel. All right, now the school of Shammai, they said, keep your napkin on the table. All right, and the school of Hillel, they said, no, keep your napkin on the seat cushion. Okay? So that was the discussion of a napkin or, a piece of cloth of this nature. All right? Nothing to do with it being folded or not, but where do you place it? Okay, the school of Hillel thought that, the table could potentially become ritually defiled in some way. So keep your napkin safe by keeping it on the seat cushion. But the school of Shammai, they said, but the seat cushion could have become ritually defiled. And so in order to protect the table, keep the napkin on the table. All right? Now, what was so significant about this particular discussion? What was significant about it was that there was no way that the Pharisees could reconcile these differences. They could not and this was a big deal because this was the effort of Pharisaical Judaism. They made the assumption that the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai and some others, they made the assumption that they were all teaching the same thing. And that everything that they taught, that there were no differences whatsoever. Okay, this was a big deal because the school of Shammai and Hillel, they agreed that in their pursuit of defining a way of life so that a person would never violate the Mosaic law, they agreed with each other that they could disagree with each other, but they would not disagree with Moses. Later on, 100, 200 years later, the Pharisees made the assumption that, no, they didn't really disagree. They were in agreement that this really was inspired by God, and so they had to figure out how are they going to reconcile any differences that might exist there. Okay? Now, I did a program for Living God Ministries titled Do Not Do According to Their Takanot. All right, I did that program. You can go find it in the Living God Ministries radio archive, where I talk about the history of all of this and put all this together for you to understand the significance of it. But for now, just as it relates to this, I'm just going to mention that this was one of those things that they couldn't quite reconcile. because either you keep your napkin on the table or you keep it on the cushion, but you can't put it, you can't reconcile that. It's either going to be one or the other. So how did they handle this, right? How did they cope with this discrepancy? They said, be careful with your napkin. All right. Which is a non-solution, but that's what makes it so significant, all right, and why it's such a big deal. Nothing about whether it's folded or not, okay? Nothing about that at all. So going back to verse 7, and the handkerchief that had been around his head, not lined with the linen clothes, but folded together in a place by itself, all right? There's no cultural significance to this whatsoever. It's just a detail that John put there in order to assert the fact that he really was there and he saw it himself personally. That this is the kind of detail you wouldn't expect to find if somebody was just making something like this up. All right? It's just an additional detail for him to emphasize the point that he was really there. Similar to him mentioning that he outran Peter. Okay? Similar to that. Just to throw in that extra little detail. That's all that this is. Okay, nothing more than that. Moving on into verse 11. This is John chapter 20, verse 11. But Mary stood outside by the tomb, weeping. Okay, so the other disciples, they went back home. Mary apparently stayed, but Mary stood outside by the tomb, weeping. And as she wept, she stooped down and looked into the tomb. She's crying, because, of course, that's what you do when you find yourself in an impossible scenario, and you find it very emotional. You're distressed. You have no solution, and so there's just this great upset that takes place, and you cry. It's perfectly appropriate and normal. Verse 12, and she saw two angels in white sitting, one at the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. Okay, so this is new. Now she's seeing the angels. Maybe they were already there. Maybe they were there when Peter and John showed up and they did not reveal themselves. But now they have manifested in a way that they can be seen visually. We have a lot of examples and a lot of testimonies that can show that there are angels who have the capacity to manifest themselves in physical ways, that this is an ability that the angelic beings have in the world that we're a part of, and that they can appear and disappear is just one of those things. They are obviously very discreet about how they decide when they're going to reveal themselves or not, and are probably guided by the Holy Spirit of God as well. But we have an occasion when an angel or two angels show themselves to Mary. They see her, they obviously see her crying, and perhaps they were moved in a way that they decided, maybe it would be good if we had a conversation with her. Perhaps there was some motive associated with that. She said to them, I went too far ahead. Verse 12, and she saw two angels in white, sitting one at the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. Verse 13, then they said to her, woman, why are you weeping? Why? What is troubling you? She said to them, because they have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him. Okay, so the angels ask Mary, why are you crying? What is this about? And she says, because they've taken the body of Jesus away and they don't know, and she doesn't know where he is. And so she's crying about it. Now, we don't have any record of what the angels may have said after that. And what would they say? Well, I'm sorry, Mary, but no, nobody did. Nobody came and took Jesus. That's not what happened. All right, they're not. That's going to open up a whole new conversation. So we don't know if they may have said anything or if they just may have delayed a little bit or what may have happened. But Jesus responded to the situation, and he manifested to her. Verse 14, now when she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there and did not know that it was Jesus. Okay, verse 14. She did not know that it was Jesus. She saw him there. She saw him standing there. She didn't know it was him. All right, so apparently he has resurrected from the dead, and he is presenting himself in a way that she, who knew him really well, will not be able to easily identify him. Okay? So in his resurrected state, he has manifested some kind of a change in his presentation of his physical person. Some kind of a change so that she could not easily recognize who he is. All right? I think this is important to recognize, to note. All right? Now, when she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there and did not know that it was Jesus. Verse 15, Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" Now, the angels just asked her that, right? The angels just asked her, "Why are you crying? Why are you weeping?" And then he asks, "Whom are you seeking?" The angels just asked. Okay, now he's going to ask as well. Okay, so he follows up with what the angels asked, as if, as if they're all involved in this. She, supposing him to be the gardener, said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." All right. Well, now there would be a serious problem with the gardener taking Jesus away, because the Romans had secured the tomb, and they were there as a guard ready to kill anyone who would try to take Jesus away. All right, so she's just trying to get the body of Jesus back. She still makes the assumption that, that he's dead, and she's thinking maybe the gardener moved the body with the assist by orders of the Romans. Maybe that was the case. But either way, she's asking if you know where he is, just tell me where he is so I can go and get him. All right? And then Jesus said to her, "Mary." All right, that's verse 16. "Mary." She turned and said to him, "Rabboni," which would be better read as Rabboni. The I at the end is in Hebrew, it is the possessive. And so if this word was to be translated, it would be my teacher, my rabbi. All right? If it was to be translated, this is a transliteration. It's the possessive. She turned to him and said, "My rabbi." Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. But go to my brethren and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, and to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene came and told the disciples that she had seen the Lord and that he had spoken these things to her. So it was then, at that time, that it was recognized that Jesus was resurrected, because she saw him resurrected. There was a change of some kind such that she would be able to recognize him for who he really is. She wasn't able to do that at first, it appears, but now she can. And so this is the testimony of Mary that Jesus resurrected from the dead. All right? So, John has recorded so far. He recorded that there was plenty of evidence that he saw personally that Jesus was dead. He recorded that he made the assumption that Jesus was in the tomb, secured by the Romans. And he recorded that he saw that Jesus was not in the tomb. And here he has recorded that Mary saw Jesus alive, resurrected from the dead. All right, so that's what we have. And he said, look, go back, tell everybody that I'm alive, and he's going to go and do something. He's going to the kingdom of heaven. All right? He's going to go to the real temple of God. He's going to complete the work that he began. He just rose from the dead. He's on his way. Okay? Apparently, he decided to delay in order to have this conversation with Mary. But he's going to the true temple of God in order to complete the work of salvation. And the way that he decided to do that was to enter into the temple, the real temple. The one there in Jerusalem was just a copy of the temple in the kingdom of heaven. He went to the true temple where the true Ark of the Covenant was located, and he sprinkled his own blood on the Ark of the Covenant there. And this of course, is explained in the letter that I believe Paul wrote to the Hebrews. And I did a bunch of videos on Hebrews, and there's a verse-by-verse study, an older one, in the Living God Ministries radio archive also. But as the date of this recording, the videos are a much better presentation that I've done on Hebrews, and where I talked about this subject as it's described in the letter to the Hebrews. All right, and so Jesus is going to go to the kingdom of heaven, and he's going to complete the work of salvation, and then he will return a little bit later. Okay, so this is the beginning of the Gospel of John, chapter 20, of right after Jesus resurrected from the dead. Now, Mary believed in the resurrection when she saw Jesus alive. Okay, that's when she believed that Jesus was resurrected from the dead. And it's quite likely that the rest of the disciples also believed when they saw Jesus resurrected from the dead. But there are many others who have believed that Jesus is resurrected from the dead, even though we have not personally seen him alive. Okay, so why would we believe that Jesus is resurrected from the dead when we haven't seen it ourselves? And this is something that happened a couple of thousand years ago even. Many generations have passed whereas people have believed that Jesus resurrected from the dead, and yet they are not firsthand witnesses. Why would that be the case? All right, well, we believe because of the evidence and the testimony of others. Okay, and this is something that I believe every person should pursue. Should pursue an answer to the question of why do you believe that Jesus resurrected from the dead? And that's my question for those of you who are using these presentations for your small groups and to have some discussion afterwards. It's a good question. Why do you believe that Jesus resurrected from the dead? And I think if you don't have an answer for that question, you should find an answer to that question because it's important. Without that, there is no salvation. And so there should be at some point some kind of an answer, some kind of a description, some reason as to why you believe that. Now, I'll tell you why I believe that. The reason that I held to as to why I believed that Jesus was resurrected from the dead was mainly because there were so many people who died who saw him resurrected from the dead, and they would rather die, they would rather be put to death than to renounce that they saw him resurrected from the dead. That's my personal conviction. You may have one that's similar, the same, or of course others. But that was what grabbed my attention and what made me have confidence in believing that Jesus resurrected from the dead was because there were so many people who were willing to die rather than renounce that fact. I know that lots of people would die for many things, but to die for something that they knew was a lie, I don't think so. No, that's just not likely going to happen, especially when you have so many people who did suffer in that way. So that's my personal conviction, and since then I have had many other reasons that I've I've recognized since then as well. But that was what made the difference for me to be able to really get started into considering what Jesus said and what Jesus did and why. So, I think it's a good question for you to ask amongst each other and to consider talking about that. And if you don't have a good answer for it, then go find one, really go find out what other people have had to say and testify concerning why they believe in the resurrection. And you might find one you like, it's just fine to believe something that somebody has presented if it's as true as you can see yourself. All right, and I'll proceed into John chapter 20, past verse 18. I'll proceed into this in the next message. Thanks.